and welcome in to another episode of Heat of the Moment. My name is Micah. I am joined, as always, by my fellow host and friend Lino. We're going to be talking some Miami Heat basketball today. Of course, as you would guess, with a team on a 4-game losing streak, we'll be going through some of the ups and downs. We'll be talking about maybe how things could improve going forward. This is also our first episode since our 3 new additions have arrived. So we'll be talking about the new guys that were acquired in the Jimmy Butler trade. But ultimately, where we want to start is with All-Star Weekend. By the time you're listening to this, All-Star Weekend is probably wrapped up. Right now, it's Sunday, February 16th. So what happened last night was Tyler Herro became the 5th player in Miami Heat franchise history to win the three-point shootout. It was very exciting. To me, right now, it's the best event going at All-Star Weekend. It's the most compelling. It was very exciting to watch Tyler, make it to the second round barely and then barely win. And, to see the reactions by his different teammates. Pat Riley was there and congratulated him. So it was all just super cool. Lino, did you have any specific takeaways seeing Tyler win the competition last night?
One, I was just glad we could really highlight just how incredible of a shooter he has become over his career. Like, this is not the same exact Tyler that we got in year 1, 2, 3, etc. Like, he has developed this part of his game to a level I never expected it to get to. Didn't even ask for it to get to this point. Like, I always wanted him to be a consistent 3-point shooter. I did not know he was going to have maybe one of the best 3-point forms of all time. Like, he didn't, it wasn't like some all-time record of, shooting in that competition, but those makes were like pure drugs every time they hit the bottom of the net. I was like, these shots are perfect. And it was just really cool to, see him celebrate. He had his family out there. Pat Riley being out there was really cool. Just seeing him cheer on Tyler. I think their relationship's pretty strong. Obviously, Tyler has gone through so much, good and bad for this fan base and for this organization. And I feel like Pat's always kind of been there for him through all of this and really been at least transparent and supportive of him. And now it's culminated to this moment where he's a 3-point champion. So really cool touch point for the weekend. Excited to see him get some minutes in the All-Star game situation tonight. And yeah, glad that we could, cap off an otherwise miserable week of Miami Heat basketball with some really cool stuff for Tyler.
Yeah, well said. I think the coolest part about All-Star Weekend is that you just get to celebrate these guys, whoever your representative is for your team. So Tyler's doing all this cool media stuff. He's wearing the All-Star practice jersey. His whole family's there. There's different players dapping him up. And then you see the guys that aren't there. They might be on vacation with their families, but they're celebrating him on social media. Like, all that stuff's just really cool to see. Tyler, there might be people that are critical of him, especially like in other fan bases. There's really no way you can logically critique his work ethic because of the rate of improvement we've seen from him. And especially because he isn't super physically gifted. Like, he is at this stage because he's an extremely skilled player, and you only become that through a ton of diligent hard work. So it's just cool to see him get celebrated. And this season has been kind of like a super dramatic slog for parts of it. And so it's really nice that no matter what happens, this will be Tyler's all-star season. Like, nothing can take that away, which is really cool that we at least have one solid positive. And I thought your point about Pat Riley was really cool, and this is a quote Tim Reynolds from the Associated Press had. It was Tyler Herro speaking about Pat Riley after the 3-point shooting contest, and he said, "I was happy I won, obviously, but I think it hit me after seeing Pat up there. We pointed to each other. I know how much he believes in me, and that means a lot." And I think, like you were saying, that's illuminating. We don't know during these trade discussions whether it was for Lillard or Harden or Mitchell, what members of the front office are saying trade Tyler or not. But something like that, I mean, it seems like he has Pat Riley's full confidence behind him. And that's after, that same press conference where Pat called out Jimmy. He also called out Tyler, referred to Tyler as fragile. And Tyler's met that challenge, missed, I think, only 2 games all season.
Damn stomach
And
virus.
Yeah, yeah. One of them was like this crazy illness that's ravaging our team. So anyway, cool moment for Tyler. So many Heat legends are there. He dapped up Gary Payton, Tim Hardaway, Mickey Arison was there, freshly nominated to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is crazy. So just a fun weekend overall. My goal for Tyler, I'm sure it's already happened by the time you listen to this, but I just want one make. The first time young All Stars, they don't get to play a lot in a 3-point contest. So one make, maybe a cool lob to somebody. I'll be good. Just one highlight to post, and that'll be great. So fun weekend overall. But Lino, like you referenced, there have been some tough times in Heatland recently. Just a quick recap. There's basically been 4 games since the Jimmy trade. Unfortunately, the Heat are 0-4. It stings a little bit extra because the Warriors are 3-1. But the Warriors are making a win now trade. It would make sense. Their team is a little better. So far, it's been a pretty rough loss to Brooklyn. To me, that's probably the most painful one. And it was a big fourth quarter collapse, which will be a theme of this episode. Another loss to Boston after a strong first quarter. Miami basically got outclassed. Not a lot of shame in that. Boston's, they're a machine. Oklahoma City, maybe the most painful loss because through 3 quarters, it was like, this is going to be our best win of the season. And then another really painful single digit fourth quarter. And then it was capped off by just a really strange game against Dallas. It was the game before All-Star, ton of players out on both sides. Miami had more guys available, and I thought should have won. But without Bam out there, you saw how much he does for the defense because Dallas's best offensive players were Spencer Dinwiddie and Dante Exum, and they looked like the Chris Paul, Houston, James Harden backcourt. Like they were killing us. So it was tough all around. We don't have to get into the net ratings over this span, but it's been rough, as you guessed. When you go in 4, you're not looking great. So, Lino, are there trends in this stretch that you think are concerning long term, stuff that could get remedied? What are you kind of seeing out there with these recent struggles?
The main takeaway outside of, this particular week, we had a rotation of casts that was quite bizarre, both from bringing in 3 new players and dealing with this ravaging stomach illness that just started taking players out one by one. We never really got our full lineup throughout the whole week. Beyond that, the main takeaway that I have for this team after this week and for the fan base in general and all the different critiques we've seen thrown at Eric Spoelstra, Terry Rozier, Bam Adebayo to some extent, and some of our role players who they either believe should have more or less minutes. The thing is, it's just all of it. Like, we have so many problems on this team and so many flaws on this team. And even when they're not flaws, we have very poor execution from really all sides of the basketball, whether it be offense, defense, or coaching, and even roster construction. That it just, after fuming for what was the better part of a week after loss, I really just came down to it's just futile to really hone in on one person or one thing that's going wrong right now because as we saw, even when that one person is doing great at their job or they're absent, so they're not a part of the problem, we're still losing basketball games. Terry Rozier had a great week of basketball like 2 weeks ago, and we went even 500. He was gone this week. We lost 4 games straight. It was a situation where, it didn't really matter what Terry Rozier was doing, and we still ended up losing. And it didn't really matter what rotations we had because we'd be winning games with the same rotations and then just losing the fourth quarter. Our team, I think, lacks energy at times and discipline and athleticism and, of course, shot making. But these are all problems that are going to arise when you have so much influx in one season. When you lose your superstar player, this is the type of season that you have when things aren't going the right way. And so these are not problems that are unique to the Miami Heat. These are definitely part of the growing pains of whatever new team this is going to be going into next season. But it's just been a very frustrating week because there were these glimpses of hope through 2/4 or even just a quarter in the game where the Miami Heat looked really good, and then they looked how they've looked all season almost immediately after that. So lots of frustration. The main takeaway is that I just don't think we need to hone in on one single person and say that this person is the reason all this is going wrong, because there's a lot going on. But I'm sure we can get more into all those specifics and those specific people. But
Hmm.
how are you feeling this week? Because I feel like you got to actually watch all the games live. I
Hmm.
watched the reruns after hearing you talk about it when we texted and stuff. But you got to experience those in real time. But how was this past week of basketball for you?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm trying to keep in mind, because we're fans, it's easy to get frustrated by what have been some tough collapses, especially in these fourth quarters. But what I'm trying to keep in mind is something we actually talked about on this show a little bit before the Jimmy trade. I want to say, which was a paradigm shift that's going to be happening with this team, and it's going to be inconsistent because we're playing younger guys. We're playing a less talented roster like Jimmy Butler, whatever you think of him when he's out there and engaged, very good, very impactful player. And so, you and I make jokes all the time like, oh, this team's destined to be 500. And that could mean they win three in a row, lose three in a row. But it could also mean they have two good quarters and then they have two bad quarters. I mean, it can literally be play to play. But that doesn't mean we can't kind of look at things, diagnose things. And one idea that always is front of mind for me is one of my favorite people that cover the league, Steve Jones Jr. of the dunker spot. Him and Nikias go on these great discussions, and sometimes Nikias will give this huge X's and O's breakdown, and then Steve will just be like, "Or could they could just hit the play better button?" And it's like, yeah, that could be coming for the Heat. It's important to keep in mind they get a good break. This is a good break for them at a good time. They needed to kind of reset. So I wanted to get into the offense first because I
Hmm.
think over this 0-4 stretch, the Heat are 28th in offense. Not hard to do when you have two single digit fourth quarters. Also, as I'm sure fans are aware of, the Heat have the most single digit quarters of any team this year. I think there have been four all season, and the Heat have three of them. So that is really tough. And I've tweeted this. The Heat have essentially no floor offensively.
Hmm.
Their offense can look good, especially when the threes are falling. That first quarter against Oklahoma City, it wasn't even threes, it was paint touches and lobs. So the offense can look good, but it can also crater in a way that is pretty remarkable. So what I want to start with on the offensive end, and this is something Spo mentioned during the Brooklyn game, the Boston game, and the Oklahoma City game, which is dealing with switches. Spo keeps calling it being flattened out. And I think that's very keen because with this team, they run a lot of fun actions. They do the dribble handoffs, they try and do post splits, they feed the ball into Bam and then everyone cuts off him. I will say I have a problem with fans that are like, oh, the offense is so lazy or it's so, unoriginal. Like they're doing good stuff, but the problem is the triggers aren't very fruitful a lot of the time because Tyler and Duncan really the only guys that can draw a lot of attention off ball. But back to the switching, which I think is something that's going to be really problematic for this team because you look at Brooklyn, who had been playing a lot better defensively during that stretch and actually has with Nick Claxton pretty good switching personnel. You look at Boston, obviously they're built to switch. That's their whole thing. And then Oklahoma City also, they went small. It switched a lot. Kendrick Williams kind of played backup center for them, played really well. They didn't have Chet that game, and it might have helped them because they were able to switch so effortlessly. So when you're a basketball team and you run a pick and roll and it's a switch, you run pistol action and it's a switch, and everything you do is a switch, eventually you have to try and get the best mismatch you can, your best offensive player on their worst defender. And then you have to say, listen, man, you have to just go get a bucket. You have to beat him. So clearly you draw help and create a shot, or you just have to consistently beat this guy over and over again. So like in the Oklahoma City matchup, he was hunting Tyler, right? He knew we would switch that guard pick and roll. Shea would get Tyler switched onto him. He'd draw a foul. He'd get to a pull up, or eventually we started having to blitz that. And Tyler, he was sick in that game, and his energy level wasn't awesome. That was coming off his illness. So I'm not, putting that blame on him entirely. But you could tell they just started getting easy shots because Tyler was having to show, then try and relocate and get back to Isaiah Joe as an amazing shooter. So that was really a struggle. So when you flip that to the Heat, you're like, okay, Tyler and Bam are the two guys you think would be attacking mismatches or attacking switching defenses, but neither of them has excelled at that this year. So I have a couple
Mm-mm.
stats on this. Um, early in the season, Tyler was very good in isolation, and that has really cratered lately. Now, this is isolation, so this doesn't mean they're necessarily attacking a mismatch, but it's a good idea of against a switching defense. Ultimately, you're going to have to score in isolation. So Tyler is averaging 0.82 points per possession on isolations. If you don't know, that's very bad. That's 37th percentile. So that's well below average. Okay. And then Bam is at 0.84 per 100 possessions. So slightly better, but still 46th percentile. And then the last thing to keep in mind, Bam posting up should be a good weapon against mismatches. But this year, Bam is averaging, it's even worse than those numbers, 0.72 per 100 possessions on post up. So that's 11th percentile. So I know that's a lot of information, but Lino, in terms of how this team can attack switching, is that just is something that's just going to be a trump card for this offense, or what are your kind of thoughts on how what that does to this roster?
Yeah, I think you targeted it exactly. What I was thinking about through this week was that we don't have anyone who can take advantage of mismatches. Tyler is an incredible offensive player, but he plays off of advantages that are created off of screens, off of movement, off these things. If the shot isn't available after that, he has done a better job of getting downhill and putting up a shot, whether it be a floater or something like that. But when it comes to purely isolating off of a player, fully reset off the dribble, it has been a struggle for him and a struggle for Bam. They just have not been able to get to their offensive game from those situations, which I don't think is a permanent thing. I think, like you mentioned, Steve Jones Jr. says, I think they can hit the play better button and get better at those things. I think they have the capacity to be good isolation scorers eventually. But what really stood out to me through this offense is not only that, but also the contrast between how our offense looks in the first quarter and how it looks in the fourth quarter. Sickness has been a thing, but energy and effort have been a thing. I think a lot of people are critiquing Spo and how the offense looks because the way it looks in the fourth quarter is very different than the way it looks in the first quarter. There's the movements, there's the cuts, there's the dribble handoffs. All those things are very fluid and active and kinetic in the first quarter. In the fourth quarter, there is a facsimile of that, but it's definitely worn down. It's slower. It's much easier to anticipate. It's causing more turnovers, and the guys who end up with the ball are shooting really flat or short, and it's just causing these issues where we go dry for full quarters at a time. And so, with the combination of those two things, it just results in very poor droughts of offense that the only solution is to be better conditioned, be healthier, and play better, which is not a great sign as far as what you can do to be better. But I do think they're capable of doing all those things. It's just a matter of executing it. And hopefully, this break will allow the offense to come out and look a little stronger, and we won't also be trying to embed three brand new players, because that is an aspect of the offense that I really want to highlight. And maybe this is more of a conversation about roster construction and lineups, which maybe we can transition to. But my one critique of Spo and all of this that I really disagreed with how he approached was how he tried to implement all three of these players almost instantaneously and with pretty heavy minutes together. You know, Kyle, Andrew, Davion, all three would sometimes be on the floor without Bam and Tyler. And that was just so bizarre to me. You have effectively three different offenses on the court together. You got one guy from Toronto, two guys from Golden State, and then the Heat roster that was here before the trade. Those three people sharing the floor together this week and just asking them to figure it out without the two best players is just a recipe for disaster. And I don't have the numbers for how those minutes went, but just from watching it, I was like, this is not going to work. And so it would make the offense a lot easier to get to if we could be a little bit more disciplined with our rotations and our lineups and the guys that we know we can depend upon, rather than putting a bunch of weight on the shoulders of people who are really just trying to get acclimated right now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and it is a crazy business because yeah, these guys got flown in. We kind of highlighted, I think, last show They fly in, they have to do all their media photos, all their interviews. They maybe get one shoot around in, and then it's like, oh, you're starting tonight. And it's like it's crazy. And obviously, the guys have been playing basketball their whole life. They know, what a flex cut is and how to run pistol or whatever it may be. But that kind of synergy you need with your teammates to play at a high level, it's just impossible for it to be there. So I think that's a good note by you, and definitely something we're going to need to keep an eye on. I think you could also frame it as a note for optimism, like as these guys get more comfortable as a team. I mean, the All-Star break is going to help with that for sure, to actually get full practices in. That's pretty rare during the NBA season. So hopefully those guys can connect and do better. And one thing you brought up, I just wanted to pivot really quickly back to what you were saying about the fourth quarter struggles. It is important to keep in mind, like you were saying, this team can look so good in the first quarter. And I think it comes to mind as how many different ways does this team have the ability to beat a team? And I think it's limited. And that's
Hmm.
okay. Like we're saying, there's probably a 500 team. Like we don't, they have a good chance to still make the playoffs. But I don't think they have a ton of ways to beat a team. So you look at that Oklahoma City game, that first quarter, we're throwing lobs, we're getting in the paint, it's looking awesome. And Hartenstein is definitely their best center overall, but he plays in a drop and he was struggling in that drop. And so Mark Dagnall, great coach, is watching that and he's like, okay, fourth quarter, I'm just going to go with Jalen Williams, big Jalen Williams, J Will at center and just switch. And now Tyler's having to beat him off the dribble, or Davion's having to beat him off the dribble. We're helping off other guys. And so, as much as we want to like criticize Spo or different people, like, oh, why is it good in the first quarter and then it falls apart? It's like the other team is making adjustments. And a lot of times they probably just have more ways to beat you. Like the Heat don't have a curveball, they kind of just have their fastball. And it's like, hope it works for this matchup. And, adding these new guys in, hopefully they can develop other counters, but it's like you're talking about, it's all connected. The actual roster construction determines how many options the coaching staff has to win things. And that's something I want to get into too. And we can talk about this with the new guys. This roster, as much as I adore almost all of them, because I am a fan at heart, is filled with mostly one way players.
Hmm.
And so we talk about the correct rotation all the time. That's probably not going to be consistent night to night because, again, some teams you're going to need more offense, some teams you're going to need more defense. And your toolbox only has one way guys. So it's not like you can be like, okay, Jaime, you be a 3-point shooter tonight. He can't do that. So then you're like, okay, well, do I play Burks more? And, so we'll talk about that specifically. But I think it does make sense to start with the new guys, kind of our impressions of how they've looked so far, what we can kind of expect them to bring to this team. Just kind of from the top, just to give you guys, if you haven't been watching, kind of the overall numbers. Andrew Wiggins is at 12 points, 4 assists, 4 rebounds. Pretty rough shooting. 29% from the field is tough. Davion Mitchell is at 7 points, 1 rebound, 4 assists, 40% shooting, also pretty rough, 30% from 3. And then finally, Kyle Anderson. He's only played in 2 games. He's averaging 7.6 rebounds, 1 assist on 48% shooting. He had a really nice game in that Dallas game. So, Lino, I think it makes the most sense to start with Wiggins because he's obviously the best player here and probably brings the most upside to this team going forward. What have you liked from Wiggins lately, and what do you expect him to bring to the team going forward once he's acclimated?
The defense looks sharp, like it looks there. I mean, Jason Tatum was still able to really get to what he wanted to get to in that Boston game, but we were just overwhelmed everywhere else on the floor. And so that was an issue. And the scoring is bad right now. And I feel nervous trying to jinx this and saying that the scoring will come along because that's what we said about Terry. And that just has not happened yet. But I believe that Andrew Wiggins, once he gets comfortable, the shots will fall. And once he's able to really understand what his role is going to be, I do believe that Andrew Wiggins, maybe more than most players of his caliber, do have, there's a mental aspect to it where he needs to be comfortable and confident. We've seen Andrew Wiggins playing when his mind isn't really there, whether that be early in his career, as he's gone through things throughout his career. His stability, I think, does play a big part in how he plays basketball. And he seems focused and excited to play, but it is just going to take a little bit for him to get comfortable and find his rhythm from a scoring standpoint. But overall, I really like how he raises the floor of our defense, especially in lineups that may not have Bam in them. So that is really exciting to see from him. And the shots he's taking are like good shots, open threes. Some of the touches in the paint are a little questionable, and some of the pass attempts, as part of it is just, I think, knowing when to expect and where to expect people to be, which is kind of hard to do in your first three game against like two top three defenses. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that grows. But I've been pretty happy with what I think we can expect from Wiggins moving forward. What about you?
Yeah, I'm super encouraged. It's just a reminder that that archetype is so valuable. Just like a big
Hmm.
3 and D wing makes so many different lineups make sense. But like you've said, I think the offense looks good in terms of he's taking the right shots. And I think he's being pretty aggressive. I was kind of worried he would be not a wallflower, but just a little shy in
Hmm.
terms of not wanting to step on toes. But he's been aggressive. I think Spo has done a really good job, kind of orchestrating some good post ups for him, and I've liked how he's read those. He's drawn help and kicked to Burks and different shooters. So I've liked how that's looked on offense. It is so interesting though when your team acquires a guy. There's really no comparison in terms of like evaluating that player, because you just, once he's in the ecosystem you're accustomed to, you can just see him processing things, doing things differently. So like the ball handling, I hadn't really thought about Andrew Wiggins ball handling a lot, but watching on this team I'm like, okay, so that's not like a strength point. Like he can run a pick and roll, but it needs to be like pretty orchestrated, maybe a handoff, even bringing the ball up the
Hmm.
court. I'm like, okay, this doesn't look like something where he's like super comfortable. So, that's something this roster needs. He can't provide it. That's okay. He can provide a lot of other stuff, but that's kind of what you're seeing. Yeah, the defense on Tatum was amazing. It was
Hmm.
very impressive. Like Tatum exploded in that third quarter. A lot of that was at like Pella Larson and different guys'
Yeah.
expense. Wiggins was frustrating him. And it was
Hmm.
really cool to see. Wiggins is legit a good defender. And so it was very fun to see him pester Tatum like that. Obviously, Tatum had a great game ultimately, but it shows the high level of defense he can provide. And his drives are a lot of fun. He gets to the free
Yeah.
throw line, which is important. This team needs that. He's very strong on his drives. He's got that spin move he really likes, and he's very strong with it. He got a couple and ones off that already. So that's been a lot of fun to watch. Speaking of defense, I want to talk about the guy that's played the most minutes since arriving, and that's Davion Mitchell. Davion, if guys aren't familiar, Wiggins, most people probably know he's second best player on a title team a few years ago. But Davion Mitchell is former ninth round pick or ninth overall pick. He's right now for us is averaging 7 points, 1 rebound, 4 assists. Like I said earlier, his shooting, I think Heat fans, if they've watched the 3 games he's played in, have gotten a good idea. It's not like a strength, but it's not a total liability. But he is one of those guys that a defense is going to be like, okay, I want to see if you can beat us. But his
Hmm.
passing and work in transition has been kind of a
Oh
nice
yeah.
surprise to me. What have you seen there?
That is been the big thing. The defense is obvious. I love watching him defend people. The way he chases people off of screens, the amount of moving screen fouls that he creates just because of how much he pesters people and how much they have to lean into him to actually stop him from getting around is truly incredible. He turns the ball over a lot, turns the ball over from the defense a lot, and or from the opponent a lot, and it's just been incredible to have a real legitimate point of attack defender there. But the offense looks interesting. Like the shooting is going to be probably at average or right below average as far as like from three, but the passing, the transition stuff, even him and Andrew, I feel like had a really good chemistry as far as, I can only imagine it's a little crazy going from two teams where you could probably transition a little bit easier and move the ball faster. Like Toronto probably has a great transition offense just because they're bad, and that's what a lot of bad teams do. To move to like the third slowest team ever, and you just don't have anybody running back. And so I'm sure it's been nice to have both of them be able to play off each other in that way and get everybody else involved. And hey, let's move the ball down the court and try to get an easy bucket here. I've liked the flashes at the rim as far as his attempts to put pressure there and take advantage of space, especially when people were kind of sagging off of him as a shooter. And the passing is there. Like he's got really solid passes and can get involved with lobs with Ware and Bam, and I think can see the offense a little bit better. And so the more he gets acclimated with these players, I think it's just going to increase the efficiency of our offense.
Yeah, no, he's looked good, and he brings a lot of things the Heat really need. He's so fast. Like we
Mm-hmm.
don't have a lot of very fast guys in the open court, so he's
Yeah.
creating fast breaks on his own sometimes. Sometimes literally like by stealing the ball, but also just by pushing off a rebound. So the defense has been great. It also helps guys like Ware a lot when Mitchell can navigate screens the way he can. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of our guards and just defenders in general get hung up on screens. So then Ware, at least for a few seconds, is guarding 1-on-2 basically. So being able to navigate those screens, blowing up ball screens like that has been really valuable. But this team struggles on offense, and right now Davion has been starting. It seems like he's essentially taken Duncan's starting spot, and I have mixed feelings on that because Davion brings things this team needs, but Duncan brings the most offense of anyone other than Tyler, but then you have defensive problems. So how does that trade-off been to you? Obviously, you and I both know, if you're starting, that doesn't mean you're closing. You could still play a lot. But if we're up to you, whether it's starting or closing, what do you think about the trade-off of Davion versus Duncan?
I'm trying not to be a prisoner of the moment and suffer from recency bias, but one of the things I did want to bring to the table today is that I've been very unimpressed with Duncan Robinson's minutes from an impact standpoint. I think there's one of these games where, was finally able to get out there. It really didn't shoot the ball at all. And I can accept, especially from what we've seen across his career and even throughout this season, that he's obviously one of our better scorers, and probably the second best shooter on the team. But all of that is null and void if he's not shooting and not actually creating that gravity that we need him to create while he's out there. And that might just be not really feeling in rhythm because his minutes keep changing. But at the same time, you have to take advantage of the moments that you get. And if he's not going to do so, I'd rather see Davion Mitchell out there because I do think the defense is maybe that type of player can make an impact every time they're on the floor. Whereas someone who's not going to shoot the ball but is out there to be an offensive weapon is just not going to have any impact and may even have a negative impact in that way. And so Davion's at least going to shoot and going to defend at a high level. So I can just trust that that is our bottom line there. And I would just need to see a little bit more from Duncan as far as motor, engine, attempts, trying to make things happen, and just effort right now. But this week in particular, when I was rewatching the game, I was like, I don't really see it right now. Maybe against Brooklyn a little bit more. Actually, I don't know if he played in Brooklyn, but there's some flashes from Duncan where he's cutting to the basket and stuff like that. But there were some games where he just was not shooting 3-point shots. And I was like, I just don't know how Spo can play you if this is what he's going to see. Like I just from Spo's position, knowing that you really need Duncan to shoot if he's going to be out there, and if he's not going to force the moment where he can get open and make tough shots, it's just hard to have that actual value proposition that he's supposed to bring to the table. But what are you thinking between those two, compared to not only what you've seen this past week, but what we know Duncan should be as a player?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be so hard for Spo because we've seen this throughout Duncan's career. Duncan's one of those players that, for whatever reason, as a starter, he is just so much more productive than as a reserve. I think a lot of that is minutes with Bam. Duncan's almost an extension of Bam on offense, and so the more they can overlap, the more impactful Duncan is going to be. And I've really struggled with the Duncan versus Davion thing. They bring such different attributes to the court that it's really hard to evaluate what is more needed for this team, especially when it's a team that slants, such an obvious direction, defensively on the season. This Heat team is 21st in offense and 11th on defense. And so if I'm the coaching staff, I'm like, okay, do we try and emphasize the weaker part of our game and hope we can get it to league average, or do we just lock in on what we're actually decent at and try and win with that? So none of it's black and white. It's much more of an art than a science, but I've struggled with it because Duncan is, you could argue maybe Wiggins, but Duncan probably is the only other player other than Tyler on the team that can consistently force the defense to make a decision. Like if he's running a DHO with Bam, they're usually going to jump out on Duncan. And then he has that pocket pass, and now you've created an advantage. Right now, Bam's playing downhill. He's playing 4-on-3. You might get a good look. Or if they don't trap, then Duncan can get up that shot. And that's, one of the best looks this offense can get, honestly. So, in a perfect world, I think, okay, you start with Tyler. He's your offensive engine from the jump. And then maybe Bam's the first sub. Nico comes in, plays with Ware. And then maybe later you come in with Bam and Duncan so that they get to overlap and Duncan can create kind of those advantages for that bench unit. But it like you're saying, Duncan, it hasn't seemed to always click for him off the bench. So I don't really know. It's a cop out, but I've gone back and forth, and obviously I have no actual control, so I just hope whatever happens works out well. But I can see it being really hard for the coaching staff. Based on Spo's comments, I think Davion's going to continue to start. I
Hmm.
think Spo sees him as a true point guard. He referenced Davion as being like an extension of himself, kind of like classic thing you hear
Yeah.
with head coaches and point guards. And Davion, the problem with him on offense is I think he makes good passes. Like I've liked his pocket passes to Bam. That's just something like a lot of guys on the team don't throw that often. And Bam's looked comfortable off those. But defenses, A, they're going to go under a lot of the pick and rolls when Davion's the ball handler, and B, they're not going to send extra help. So, in theory, you'd love a point guard that could get downhill, like make a skip pass, to a corner shooter, but a Davion Bam pick and roll, teams probably aren't going to leave a corner shooter unless they feel like Bam's going to get the lob. So there are limits to how much he can produce offensively, but he's going to provide a ton of impact on defense, and what he brings in transition, stuff like that, is really much needed for this offense. So ultimately, I think I'd start Davion and just hope Duncan can get, comfortable in that bench role and produce offensively. Because like we've seen, like these fourth quarter starts when sometimes Tyler is not out there or Tyler and Bam aren't out there. Like if Duncan started the fourth quarter and hit 2 threes, it'd be a lot better. So that
Hmm.
would be more than half our points in some of these recent fourth quarters if he could do that. So that's kind of where I ultimately land on it. The final guy hasn't played as much, but Kyle Anderson, somebody that almost wasn't a member of the Heat with the original construction of this trade, and now is. He is a Swiss Army knife. If anyone's not familiar with this game, he's called slow mo. He has a very unorthodox style where he kind of meanders around and he's unique, certainly. He's not much of a shooter, but he's a smart offensive player, good screen setter, just high IQ guy. Lino, what have you seen with how Kyle Anderson kind of fits on this roster?
It's been pretty limited so far, but I've liked what it presented itself potentially when we found out we were going to keep him. Like, I was like, this is an upgrade, really. Like, it's an expensive upgrade that, keeps us from being, eliminates a little bit of cap space for us, but I do think it's a movable contract in the future. But while Kyle's on the team, I love it as far as actually having a third big that we can play that's not 50,000 years old. Like Kyle Anderson can really play that position and do well and not necessarily be a negative. I think defensively he is sound there. And then offensively, I think he does a lot of great role player things as the third big. I think, when he has to start or, come right off the bench, that's when things get a little bit shaky, as I don't think he was getting a ton of minutes in Golden State, as it were. So his season just kind of got jump started right here in the middle of February. And that can be difficult to kind of get into a new rhythm like that. But I do like what he presents. I think he had a great game against the Mavs, and I'm curious to see, where he gets implemented moving forward. But how do you feel about the minutes we've gotten from him and his long term fit with the Miami Heat?
I think he'll probably be a like spot rotation player. I think like
Hmm.
there was one game where he was available and just didn't play at all. I think that could be common. And again, this team we'll talk about a little later when we get specifically into Spo. But it's just hard. They have almost like a bunch of, I don't want to call them like C plus sounds rude, but like they have a bunch of slightly above average NBA players that all do different things. And so it's really hard to pick which one works best for that night. But I think there'll definitely be times where he's helpful. Like you mentioned, I thought him at backup center is an interesting idea because you can switch. He's a good defender. Where I'd really be excited to see him is in the zone. Miami's basically played zero zone since the trade, which that makes sense. That's not something guys are just used to playing. But I think Davion, Wiggins, and Anderson could all be really impactful in the Heat zone. So that's something I'll be looking forward to coming out of the break. But yeah, he can switch. He can play good defense. He's got a high IQ. You need to play a lot of shooters around him. I wouldn't think he and Bam will play together very much, but if it's like a bench group with Nico, Ware, Duncan, and Tyler, or something, maybe Terry, something like that. I could see him being really impactful. But also I could see some DMPs because there's just other guys that do similar things. But yeah, other than the contract, which is like a little rich but not crazy, I think he's definitely a good player to have around. I mean,
Hmm.
honestly, we haven't talked about it much because Jimmy was out so many games, but the Heat have actually been like very healthy this year. So we have had a lot of tough rotation decisions to examine because there haven't been that many injuries. There haven't been that many guys out. So he's definitely somebody that immediately gets bumped up, even if one rotation guy is out. And we saw that in the Dallas game. He's super impactful. So good vet to have around. I have no issues with him on the roster for sure.
Yeah, I think overall these three additions will help us moving forward. And I think
Hmm.
at the very least, Wiggins, Davion are going to be very massive, role players for us in the future construction of this team. And if not, I think they're very valuable players across the league. So those conversations can happen when they need to happen. But overall, I'm excited to have these guys here. I was excited about the trade despite going 0-4 since then. I'm still really excited about having these players. I think they do answer some of the needs that we have, especially in their particular roles. And hopefully, we can just get everybody playing at their highest level because that's something you mentioned earlier. As far as we only have one way we can really play to win. And if that doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we also can't really make mistakes. Like, other
Hmm.
teams can shoot terribly from three, like, and still win a game against us by like 10. And
Hmm.
other teams can, be sloppy with the ball or, come out with not enough energy and, get it back together later in the game or figure it out along the way. We really have to play a flawless game from quarter one to quarter four to win games these days, which is unfortunate, but that's just where our floor is as a team. And that's just what we have to prevent from happening is just going into some of these games loose and, um, with a lot of mistakes and without having a lot of top end talent, you're just stuck with having to play a lot of finely executed basketball, which is tough to do from a night to night basis, especially down the stretch here.
Yeah, exactly. I think to close out or to wrap up towards the end here, I do want to talk about Spo. I
Hmm.
think we don't get too much into the whole online Discord. A lot of people, myself included, use Twitter just to vent sometimes. So that's important to keep in mind. But there's been a lot of criticism of Spo lately, which as a Heat fan is it can feel sacrilegious sometimes. I mean, he has been here throughout all the ups and downs, for if you include his video room time, like over 2 decades, I think he's been a part of the organization. So I hope you and I can kind of be an example of like we can criticize Spo. We can say, hey, I wish you do things differently, while also acknowledging this guy is an elite coach. If the Heat ever wanted to part ways with Spo, they would not fire him. They would trade him. Like he's the kind of coach that would get you a draft pick if you didn't want him to be on your team anymore. So that's something to keep in mind for the fan base. I know it's easy to kind of take for granted what you have, but he's a phenomenal coach. But that does not mean we can't say, hey, Spo, maybe try this out, maybe do this differently. So if whether negative or positive, what have been your thoughts on Spo recently as he's managed what's obviously been a very strange season?
Yeah, again, just to give Spo the credits that's due. Great coach all around. Maybe not his best coaching season, and I do have a few critiques of that, but it has to be said that he's playing with a pretty short deck of cards. This is not a talented team, and we just went up against some tough opponents. Should Spo be able to find a way to make this team beat the Nets? Yes. Has he done that in the past with worse rosters? Yes. But at the same time, comparing him to Dagnall, comparing him to Missoula, when the rosters that they get to play with and scheme with are very, very different. Like, we just have to, be sensible about what the expectations are here. At the same time, I think the distinct difference between, this kind of 500 season that we're getting from Spo and the 500 seasons we've had before with these type of rosters before Jimmy got here and after the LeBron era is that it does not feel like we are getting the maximum potential from this roster on a night to night basis. And I think part of that has to do with Spo's decision making down the stretch, but also part of it has to do with maybe not being on the same page at all three levels from front office, coaching staff, and the players. I don't know if we know what we're trying to accomplish this season. Like, are we really trying to make a run in the playoffs? Are we trying to develop the young guys? Are we trying to luck our way into a lottery pick? Like, those are three very different types of way to approach every single night in basketball. And I feel like every night we're doing something a little different. I think, we're giving guys like Kyle Anderson a DNP some nights. We're playing guys like Pelle Larson 30 minutes some nights. It's just, it doesn't fit into an ideology that anybody can especially understand, or anybody can understand, especially the fan base. Like, we don't know what they're trying to do out there some nights, and it can be very confusing from quarter 1 to quarter 4. But ultimately, if we're going to try to win a ton of games right now and make a large push in the playoffs, we probably don't need to be going so deep in our roster. And if we're going to go that deep in our roster, we probably shouldn't be expecting to win. And so I just think Spo has some blame in that I do think he gets to call the shots on this. And I don't think the team really knows what he wants. Bam kind of mentioned this in one of their post game interviews that, like, everybody needs to be on the same page and they're not including the coaching staff. And so they really need to figure out what they're trying to do. I think Spo still keeps trying to get away with getting Tyler and Bam off the floor at the same time. And this is just not a team that can do that, especially not with three brand new players. I think that we need to get back to our starters almost immediately. I think all of our starters need to be playing some insane minutes if we're trying to win. Like, if we're trying to win, Bam, Tyler need to be over 40 minutes a game. It's just, that is going to be the only way we can win. And guys at the end of the roster really don't need to be playing so much. It's just, we don't have the ability to do so and expect to win on a night to night basis. Like, you can either cut it really tight with the talent and try to make things stretch, or you can try to get a bunch of people some minutes and see what happens. But it's just so chaotic right now. And Spo really needs to figure out going forward after the All-Star break how he is going to direct this team and what the message is going to be about what we're trying to do. But, from your perspective, where do you feel like Spo has succeeded this season, and where do you feel like he could be doing better?
Yeah, I think you pointed out a lot of good things in terms of the direction slash the purpose of this season. And I think, you don't want to make like excuses for people, but I do think that has probably been one of the most difficult parts of Spo's season is I think going into this year, the thought process was Jimmy's got to play hard to get his extension. He wants to earn his extension. So we're approaching this season like we have the last five, take the regular season somewhat seriously, make the playoffs, and then see if we can go on a run. I think that was the idea. And then once the Jimmy thing fell apart, it's like, okay, you know, like the Heat are never going to tank, but it's like, okay, do we emphasize young guys a little more? Do we give them a little more rope in hopes that, the back half of the season they'll be more productive? And we'll just have to wait and see how it all works out. One thing I always keep in mind is Spo, I don't know it off the top of my head, but he has like a top 3 or top 5 winning percentage in March of any coach in NBA history. And Spo is a tinkerer. He really I feel like every year there's some frustration with, oh, why are you playing Deadman so much? Why aren't you playing Bam over Whiteside? There's always something, but Spo's always working towards something. And I think with this season, kind of getting flipped upside down the middle, a huge roster changing trade right in the middle of the season. It might take extra time, but I truly trust him to figure it out. And I mean, he's in a tough spot because you and I have talked about like, oh, we want to develop these young guys. This team didn't win the championship. You need to develop them. And it's cool in theory, but then you're watching that Dallas game and Khalil Ware for stretches of it was a disaster. And I was like, please put Kyle Anderson back in. Like, and then I think to myself, like, now, Micah, you said you wanted to develop Ware. You wanted him to get reps. But when you're about to lose to Dallas with Spencer Dinwiddie as their best player, you're like, put in Kyle Anderson. So I'm sympathetic to the situation because of that, because as an observer, as a fan, I'm inconsistent in it as well. But yeah, for me, criticisms of Spo, I think he's given a longer leash to Terry than makes sense. I think we're over 40 games in. Duncan Robinson and Alec Burks have just been straight up better than Terry Rozier in almost every phase of the game. So I don't understand why they wouldn't have the majority of his minutes. I'm sympathetic to the fact that there's not a lot of ball handlers on this team. So you want, somebody that can take some pressure off Tyler. But Terry hasn't done that, efficiently for very much of the season. So I can see why, hey, maybe you don't play Terry as much. I can definitely understand why people are critical of that. And I think the rest of it is what we've kind of been a theme of this show, which is this is a tough roster to manipulate to your will. It's a lot of one-way guys. It's a team that can really probably only be good defensively, but it could be so bad offensively that no matter how good you are on defense, you won't win games. So
Mm-hmm.
it's walking that line. I was doing notes for the show, and one of the things I thought that summed it up the most succinctly was this season, for large stretches of it, it feels like Spo is grasping at straws, but it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to be critical because that might be all that's there. There
It's
might
just
only
straws.
be, yeah, might only be straws to grasp. So it's tough to be super critical. I do have a pop quiz for you. I thought this was funny. So on the Heat's current roster, okay, there's one player that is positive in offensive EPM and defensive EPM. For people that don't know, that's estimated plus minus. It's one of the best public all-in-one metrics in terms of how impactful a player is. So one guy on the current roster who is positive in offense and defense. Who's your guess?
I'm gonna go with Pelle Larson.
I love the guess. Hopefully one day. It is Andrew Wiggins. So
Awesome.
a guy that hasn't even been here, we don't have, as according
Excellent.
to EPM, we don't have anyone that is positively impacting both sides of the court that's been on the roster all season. So now it's not like Bam recently. Bam has been playing really well offensively recently. He definitely will probably end up being a positive impact on both sides. Tyler's improved defensively, and obviously it's been awesome on offense. So there's guys that are having overall positive impacts, but I thought that was funny. We talk so much about how there's a lack of two-way players on this team,
It's
and
like there's
we
none actually.
yeah, actually there was one. He also wore 22, and he is gone. So it's like
Well, at least we replace him with another one, just to a
right,
much severely less degree.
yeah, exactly. So I know I probably sound like a lot of excuse making for Spo, but I'm just a guy. I'm just a fan. I'm not going to pretend to know more than him, and I really tried to take a hard look at it. And you and I both pointed out things we wish he'd change a little, but there's not like some obvious glaring thing to me. And I think a lot
Mhm.
of it is guys will play better. This 4 game losing stretch, the Heat are shooting 28% from three. If that was 38% from three, maybe they go 2-2, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what we would have expected in this
Lots
stretch.
of open looks that were missed, and that's when I was watching the fourth quarters. I literally rewatched every game this weekend from the past week, and just looking at it, I was like, these are not. Besides Tyler getting absolutely clamped up by OKC, and us just really losing it there. A lot of it was just dry spells of guys who are shooting at least average this season, just not making any shots at all, and so that is bizarre. But I wanted to cap all of that off by just again reminding people that it's all of it. Like, it's not just one thing. Spoke can probably do a couple things differently. If I had to compare his coaching this season to other seasons, I would say it was worse, but that's not our problem. Like, Terry has not had enough good basketball this season to deserve the minutes he has right now, but that's also not our problem. Like neither of those guys can really front the blame of all of this. Bam had a tough time up until this month of basketball until once Asia's shoe dropped. Like that is not a problem either. The problem is all of it. Like we have a culmination of issues from a season that was really thrown to the wind because our superstar player demanded out, and we were not expecting it to go this way. And so there weren't really many options for this team to be good. There was really only one end game for it to happen, and that's everybody playing incredible, amazing basketball all at once, which was probably would have kept Jimmy from demanding a trade anyways. But the truth of the matter is, as our frustrations grow throughout the season, we just have to really taper expectations from all these guys, but also not put too much on them because even if Terry were to start averaging 20 points a game, I think we're still going to be a 500 team. Even
Yeah.
if Spo tightens up the rotations and shortens up leashes, I think we're still going to be a 500 level team because you're still limited by the sum of your parts to a certain degree. And sometimes you can get more than the sum of your parts from a roster, and Spo is usually particularly good at that. But I think even if he got the most out of this roster, it's just not built to be a contender yet. And if you're not going to be a contender, the next step is a 500 team or a lottery team. And so that's just where we are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you're saying, and we've talked about this before too, you can appreciate that there were good moments, even if the end result is a loss. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm trying to remind myself of. Like during the Oklahoma City game, I found myself feeling pretty positive. Like obviously they destroyed us in the fourth quarter. They're the best team in the league. They
Yeah.
won that game by 14. I went back and looked. The over under, whatever, like the Vegas spread was Oklahoma City by 13 and a half. Like that game ended exactly how it was projected to, but within it, we saw some really good stretches of Heat basketball. So, like,
Yeah.
yes, it's frustrating that they fell apart in the fourth and da da da, but that doesn't erase like those first three quarters were like, okay, this is how it can work. This is something the coaching staff can look at and be like, listen, maybe we don't see a drop every night, but when we see drop, we're comfortable with the looks we can get to against it. Stuff like that's important. So the other thing, just looking forward a little bit, it's interesting to look at Bam's recent uptick in efficiency has coincided with Tyler struggling a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Dunks and Threes, which is a great website, can let you put like a player's true shooting percentage over the season on a graph, and you can put multiple players on there. So I put Tyler and Bam on there, and it looks like a strand of DNA. Like Tyler is way up here, and then they meet and then start going the opposite direction, and I'm like, oh, that's not good.
It's
So
not ideal.
yeah, hopefully those can both go up, because I mean those are our two best players. If they can both score efficiently, that would do wonders for this offense. And we have a huge sample size of Bam being a good offensive player, and he's certainly looked like that recently, and we have that same for Tyler. So I expect them to figure it out, and I think the break was good timing for both of them. Upcoming, the Heat have at Toronto, at Milwaukee, at Atlanta. I'm personally hoping for 2-1. Feel like it's realistic. Is there anything in those specific matchups, or just going forward for really the home stretch of the season, you'll be looking for?
I'm excited to see another match with Khalil Bam against Milwaukee. That first one was interesting. I think they've got more time and minutes now, so that'll be interesting. And yeah, I mean overall, I really hope we go 3-0 here. We haven't done that in a long time. It's been months since we strung together 3 wins in a row, but that would be great because we'd be right back at 500, and that
Mm-hmm.
seems to be the natural course of things, and then we can start losing games again. But overall, I'm excited to just see the new guys get further acclimated, everybody hopefully coming back refreshed and really attacking the back half of this season with real energy, first quarter through fourth quarter.
Yeah, well said. Totally agree. Very excited to see Wiggins get more comfortable. I mean, I think he could be a really big part of this team for several years. So
Mhm.
excited to watch that. And just something to watch out for. Over the last 2 weeks, Toronto is 29th in net rating, very bad. Milwaukee's 26th in net rating, not good at all. And then Atlanta's 13th, which is slightly above average, and they're not a very good team overall in the season. So there's a chance the Heat could have some success in this run. So that's what we'll be hoping for. We'll be recapping all of it for you guys when we talk to you next time. We appreciate you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us any comments on. You can do that on Spotify on the different channels, or you can do it on YouTube as well. We'd love to hear from you guys, any kind of feedback you have. For myself, Micah, my good friend Lino, we appreciate you guys for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time.